we'll start with you, and for the record, your name is Kevin Kavanaugh, and you are testifying on behalf of the Legislative Budget Board. Is that correct?
That is correct. Aaron's actually going to start the presentation. If you want to read him in first.
Hold on real quick. All right. For the record, your name is Aaron Henriksen, and you're testifying on behalf of the Legislative Budget Board. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, very good. Please proceed.
All right, members, good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Aaron Henriksen, Legislative Budget Board. I'm going to be providing an overview of House Bill 1 as introduced, which is the 26-27 biennial general appropriations bill. If you turn to page 2 of the presentation, you can see a comparison of the 24-25 biennium to the 26-27 biennium contained in House Bill 1, broken out by category of method of finance. On an all funds basis, the total appropriations increased by $2.8 billion, which is a 0.8% increase. The following slides will provide additional details of some of these big funding changes in there. If you turn to page 3, you'll see that on pages 3 through 5, there's additional detail showing the 24-25 biennium compared to the 26-27 biennium, broken out by article of the budget for all funds, general revenue funds, and state funds. If you turn to page 6 of the document, though, I'll start going over some of the major funding changes. So on page 6 of the document, under major funding items, I'll begin with public education. The Foundation School Program appropriations fully fund requirements in current law, including approximately $800 million to increase the yield on golden pennies. Contingency funding is provided of $4.85 billion for increased funding for public education, $1 billion for an education savings account, and $400 million for the school safety allotment. Under property tax relief, $51 billion is provided to maintain tax relief provided since HB 3 of the 86th session, and for new property tax relief. New property tax relief includes $3 billion in additional compression and an additional $3.5 billion in contingent funding. For higher education, there's contingent funding of $850 million for a Texas State Technical College endowment, $304.4 million for graduate medical education expansion, and $1.3 billion to the Texas University Fund. Turning to page 7, $6.5 billion is provided for border security operations across 13 state agencies. Under criminal justice and public safety, $330.6 million is provided to pay, for a pay increase for correctional officers, and $402.6 million is provided for new troopers at DPS. Under health and human services, contingency funding of $3 billion is provided for the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. There's an increase of $4.1 billion in all funds for Medicaid and CHIP, primarily due to projected caseload growth. There's a little less than $900 million in GR provided to increase attendant wages to $12 per hour, and $86 million in general revenue for DFPS, or the Department of Family and Protective Services, to roll out community-based care at an additional 4 regions. Under other highlights, $36.2 billion is provided for highway planning and design, right-of-way acquisition, construction, and maintenance. $5 billion is provided for an additional funding for the Texas Energy Fund, and $192.3 million is provided for the Texas A&M Forest Service to fully fund the backlog of volunteer fire department grants. Turning to page 8 of the document, this shows items intended to be funded in the supplemental appropriations bill, which will affect fiscal year 25, including there is $1 billion for an additional one-time legacy payment for the employees' retirement system, $515.8 million for construction and major repair of criminal justice facilities, and $718.7 million for cross-article agency information technology projects. If you turn to page 9 of the document, you will see an overview of the $51 billion in property tax relief that I mentioned before, broken up by the cost to maintain property tax relief provided by the 86th, 87th, and 88 legislatures, and the cost of new property tax relief proposed in HB 1. If you turn to the following page, you'll see the capacity under the 3 major constitutional and statutory spending limits. The pay-as-you-go limit has capacity of $11.6 billion. The tax spending limit has capacity of $4.8 billion, and the consolidated general revenue limit has a capacity of $9.8 billion. At the moment, the controlling limit is the tax spending limit with $4.8 billion, although these amounts will be updated as we go through session and the appropriations bill is updated. Turning to the following page, you'll see an overview of the way LBB staff can assist the committee in your offices, along with some helpful documents that are on our website. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Very good. Members, any questions? All right. Thank you, sir. All right. For the record, your name is Kevin Kavanaugh, and you are testifying on behalf of the Legislative Budget Board. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Please proceed.
I have no additional testimony. I'm just here to provide support.
All right. Well,
I have some questions.
Chair recognizes the Vice Chair.
No, thank
Martinez
you.
Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you were here earlier in the earlier layout from the Comptroller's office, and I'm just really curious, and I imagine your role as bills move through this process. I want to lean in on tax equity analyses. I think that we generate a lot of revenue for the state, and sort of the initial policy is always to just give it back through the form of a homestead exemption, which, I think is a decent policy. We could argue and make that decision appear, but we know the inputs into the revenue come from various tax sources. And so I guess as you all analyze, or if you'll be seeing bills in this process, what level of detail will you give us on the tax equity side to give us a sense of who's paying into the tax system and who's receiving the benefit?
Yeah. So again, for the record, Kevin Kavanaugh. So for those of you who aren't aware, a tax equity note is a document that our office is required at the request of the chairman to give y'all for any tax bills that he may request. And what the tax equity note essentially does is the tax incidence tables that the Comptroller's office previously discussed. A tax equity note essentially shows how those tables will change if the piece of legislation became law.
Right. And
So the tables would essentially be the same that are in that report, just the delta.
So I'm thinking about previous sessions, for instance, like I imagine those reports that you've done previously, they're still available and accessible, right?
Ones from prior sessions?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, those would be available on TILO.
So I know like one particular session, we analyzed the policy effect of lowering the state sales tax rate by a percentage point. You would have analysis that would show how that, might impact people in terms of based on how much money they are putting into the sales tax system, correct?
Yes, I believe, I'm going off memory here, but I believe that was in 2019, where you're talking about raising the sales tax to offset property tax?
No, sir. I believe in 2015, there was a proposal from the House to lower the sales
2015,
tax. I believe so.
That's going way back, yes.
I'm getting old, but I think we did it one time.
I was here, yeah. We did do one for that bill, yes.
Okay, and maybe we can meet offline or talk offline. I'm interested in looking at that report, and I think my vantage point is, I think that there are other tax policies that we could be discussing at this committee that actually help people that are putting into the tax system. There are a lot of small businesses out there that are working really hard, generating a lot of revenue, a lot of that taxable revenue to the state, and they may not own a home, right? And so I'm curious to see any report, any study, any discussion where we've looked at that, because I think it would be an interesting discussion point to, as we anticipate having discussions on reducing taxes. And while the homestead exemption is one option, there may be others.
Yeah, we're happy to meet with you to discuss previous reports.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Very good. Chair recognizes Representative Truxclair.
Thank you for this breakdown. This is great to see and easy to digest. I wanted to ask about on page 3. Well, actually, page 3, 4, and 5. What is the explanation behind the significant drop in natural resources? Is there something that's driving that? It looks like all funds, natural resources is down percent change, 34%. In general revenue funds, it's down 47%. And then in all state funds, it's down 37%.
That is primarily going to be related to decreased federal funds and the removal of one-time funding items. And so, much of the federal funds that are included at this point are essentially what agencies were estimating last summer. There are some provisions in Article 9 which lets the federal funds kind of true up to what that revenue actually is, but it's based off of those two main factors, is removal of one-time funding items and a decrease in federal funds.
So, but federal funds are not included in page 5, all state funds, correct?
That would be correct. It would not be. That is primarily related to removal of one-time funding items.
To what?
Removal of one-time funding items.
One-time funding items. Okay. I will follow up with our natural resources chair on that, because obviously, as we're all facing concerns about water availability in the state, I want to make sure that that is reflected properly in our appropriation here. And then so public education funds, both by, I guess on all three of these charts, is up about 9.2%. And it's state funds up 9.5%. Are these numbers adjusted for inflation?
No, it wouldn't be inflation adjusted. It would be the major cost driver there are the contingency funding items that I mentioned before, which are provided for property tax relief, for the additional public education funding, some of those items, as well as what's driving that increase.
Okay. And total, is it, do you know if we are on track this biennium based on what's been filed so far, that the total public education funding is going to be up over $100 billion?
I don't have that full number. Oh, actually, I can tell you the Foundation School Program, which is the school finance formulas, the biennial recommended amount is $71.8 billion. That wouldn't include some of the local property tax revenue, which is collected and held locally. I can tell you that amount is approximately, the local number is going to be approximately $30 billion per year, approximately. $33 billion per year.
So that is 104 billion.
The 70 billion was a biennial number for 26 and 27. If you include all of Texas Education Agency funding, so not just the school finance formulas, but grants and the administration of that as well, the total biennial funding of that is about $90 billion.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question. I know that there is a push from state leaders to seek reimbursement from the federal government for I think, $11 billion that we have invested in border security. Do you have any insight about, I know you probably can't tell us whether or not that's going to happen, but what happens to that funding if we do receive that reimbursement, which I hope we do?
There's a provision in Article 9 which essentially says that if additional federal funds come into the state, then those funds can be spent. And so it would depend on how those federal funds would be coming into the state. So I imagine they would go to an entity, probably the governor, or multiple entities that are currently paying for border security. It would all depend on the, how that funding would flow. But based on provisions in the budget, if additional federal funds are received, the state is able to utilize those funds.
And does the timing matter? Does it matter whether it happens tomorrow or in September?
No, there's a provision in the 24-25 General Appropriations Act which provides that authority. There's a provision in the introduced version of the House Bill 1, which covers 26-27. So essentially, whenever if that were to happen, the state would be able to draw down those funds dependent on any federal requirements associated with it.
Okay, thank you.
Members, any other questions? Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. Chair calls James Quintero, Jennifer Rabb, and Shannon Halbrook.